The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Hi, I'm Fred, and I'm the executive.
And I am Kristina, and I am the mystic. Welcome to the Executive and the Mystic podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about, this is a topic I absolutely love, which is finding the right altitude in order to get the right attitude. And you know what I'm talking about, right, Fred?
Well, it's part of that jargon everyone talks about is like, this is a 30,000 foot level, but we're going to dive deep. And we thought we'd just use it as a framework to talk about how an individual can gain altitude or a perspective, which is what happens when you get altitude, to see your situation under different circumstances. And at times we get so close to things, we're zeroing in, it looks like a horror show, and you pull back and you realize it's not. And so this is our opportunity to share that with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that I've been in businesses where, it's such a fascinating thing to recognize that, whether it's a strategy or whether it's a vision, when you're kind of looking at the bigger view and you're trying to be like, oh, we're going to be up here at this high level, or even with reporting. I once had an ongoing argument with, I was the VP of operations, and I was having an ongoing argument with the other leadership because they were like, we're gonna report every single week on billable hours or utilization. I used to just be like, but you're going to spend all your time trying to fix this report because, there's a certain cadence that you're wanting to follow, and yet you're not allowing the natural flow and growth that is necessary in a company to be able to happen if you're reporting on it all the time and then having to fix the reports constantly, right? Have you experienced stuff like that? Would you be on the other side of that, Fred, where you're like, report every week?
It's like when they say don't watch the stock market, you get nauseous with the ups and downs. So it's about that. It's really all about really gaining perspective. But I think we should, dive right into it, to use the metaphor even more appropriately. And we're going to start at 0 feet. You're grounded, and we call that home base. So go ahead, Kristina. Let's talk about that a little bit. So there's a state that one sort of finds himself in. We're going to give this to you in a way that you can sort of say, okay, now this is the altitude. What does that signify? So right now, let's start with the state.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the state, this is the state that we wake up in, and this is the state that we have to go in order to go to sleep. So for anybody who experiences insomnia or anything along those lines, if you can't get back into 0 state, friends, if you can't get back into 0 state, you're going to find it really, really hard to go to sleep because your transactional mind, your mind is running really, really fast. I used to go to meditation retreats a lot back before I had kids and I actually had copious spare time. And we would meditate for 10 hours a day. And we would meditate in an observer state, right? So an observer state being like we were watching our sensations, we were watching our mind, all the thoughts that came up. And it would be next to impossible to go to sleep because you were in the observer state. It was like you were in a state that was very disembodied, for lack of a better way of saying it, right? It was the observer of self, and therefore it wasn't self that was the body. It was able to observe, and you were trying to gain equanimity. Equanimity being a fancy word for, being okay with whatever sensations arise, whether it's pain or pleasure or any of those things. And the one way that I found to trick my mind was that I would move my attention into my body and start just paying attention to my breathing.
Right.
And what
the breathing is the key, watching your breath. And they say that if you get up, as I do, at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, is to have your exhale be longer than your inhale, and that relaxes the body naturally.
Yes. Because ultimately, knowing that you have to land the plane. If you think of your body as a plane, and in order to be able to enter into your day, you have to be on the runway. And in order to be able to land at the end of the day, to be able to then rest, is that you have to get back into your body. And so the grounded state is the state of being aware of your sensations and being connected with them and having very little awareness of the mind. That is the 0 state. There are many different versions of what that looks like. For some people who are very grounded people, they can be like, I'm totally tapped into the earth and I have my umbilical cord, or whatever people use as their method for grounding. But for a lot of other people, they just get back in your body, just breathe, right?
Right. And then, of course, we have our morning routines when we get up. It helps to have those somewhat defined so you don't miss the cadence of it. eventually your body just does it automatically. You're not even aware that you're doing it. Was it the autonomic system that just sort of takes over and says, "I got this. Don't worry. Stop thinking about it." The first time you do it, you got to go through the motions of it,
Yes,
and then it
yes.
happens. It happens in second nature, either when you wake up or you go to bed. There are
Yeah,
rituals and that's humans like rituals. We do enjoy routine of some sort, and it does help us stay centered throughout the entire day. Um,
absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that's the personal behavior, and then of course, frankly, the same thing happens in business. When you're if I always give people a recommendation to take 15 minutes at the end of their day and just jot down the one, two things you really accomplish because you really don't accomplish more than one or two. There's a lot of activity, but in terms of critical things that you need to accomplish, one or two is a lot. Um, and just jot that down and then write down the three things you want to do tomorrow. And it's funny because I always ask them, if I said to you, you need to spend 2 weeks a year doing nothing but planning, people freak out about, I don't have 2 weeks a year. I go, yes, you do. You got 15 minutes a day. That's 90 hours. That's 2 weeks. So for 15 minutes a day to recap your day, reset yourself to get into what you're going to do next, that also helps you quiet your mind, by the way, because it gets all this stuff out of your head and down. I was guilty of that for years, always in my head, always in my head. If I just put it down on paper, it's out of my head. It's easy. Einstein never memorized his phone number. Someone would ask for his phone number, you go find a piece of paper with it on it, and they go, "Why don't you memorize it? You're a genius." He goes, "Why? I don't want to occupy my mind with stuff that's needless." In other words, don't get on Jeopardy. They have a bunch of useless facts in your head. And so that's really, really important. But why don't you also now maybe reinforce uh, the mantra one would say to oneself in this state of grounding?
Here's a good mantra for being grounded. I am here. I am safe. I can feel the ground beneath me.
Yeah.
I really enjoy earthing. Some people like to earth, which is to literally go outside without anything between you and the earth, or even to touch plants. And that may be
That just means
that.
barefoot in the grass. That's what we're talking about. Barefoot in the grass. No concrete, no rubber shoes because we don't touch the grass very often, and easier said to do in the spring and summer, not the winter. But
Yeah.
yes, grounding like that does give us the electrical impulses of the earth. So grounding is a big thing, and there are grounding mats, and there are grounding mats you can put underneath your mattress. So even when you sleep, you are grounded.
Yeah, so that's the physical version of grounding is to actually reset your electrical impulses to be in tune with the heartbeat of the earth. Effectively, is what you're doing. It's very similar to if you've ever heard any of the research on the 9 second hug, right? So for somebody who's looking to co-regulate their nervous system with another person, you do the 9 second hug, right? Because effectively our systems are electromagnetically connected when we're in proximity with another person, which allows that reset to happen. And the same thing happens when you're walking barefoot on the earth. You're effectively hugging the earth and you're using the earth as the reset. I mean, it's kind of the ultimate regulator of the nervous system. We can't really do a lot to perturbate. The sun can do some stuff, but we can't do a lot to perturbate the nervous system of the earth, right?
Okay, we're going to go up a little bit higher in our hot air balloon, but we're going to go not too high, 500 feet, which is the transactional mind. And that's the state
Yes.
of one is just doing, solving, and managing. We spent a lot of time there. So, Christina, take it away.
Yeah. Okay. So this, for those of you who are brain scientists or armchair brain scientists, this is the beta state of mind. This is I am in the deliberative mind. I am thinking everything is transactional in this space. I often think of it as two-dimensional in nature because it's cause and effect. It's like this happens and this happens and then this happens, and it has a very difficult time to break out of the context of what is going to happen next, and I need to solve this problem and I need to go, go, go. And it's like, everybody's talking about, oh, I'm going to achieve, I'm going to do, I'm going to do and do. The transactional mind is an incredible tool for us, really wonderful for problem solving, but it also gets us into a lot of trouble if we let it run the show all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is the classic Stephen Covey's 7 habits. Your knife gets dull if you're just going and going and going. You're not stopping to reflect, to sharpen your saw, so to speak, and make sure that you're taking your time. The part of it too is when people get out of shape. It's a conversation you'll hear us say is that you're in shape and out of shape. When you're out of shape, you're pushing too hard, you're hitting the pedal harder, you're demanding more of others without consideration, without stepping back, getting a different perspective. is to make sure that you don't get into these weird dynamics in relationships, where you triangulate with each other. Especially if you're the leader, if you're the boss, and you're a bit abrupt and curt with a subordinate, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I got yelled at, and they become the victim, right? And they go rushing off to some friend, over the water cooler on the next Zoom call saying, can you believe he said that to me? And they're looking for agreement. They're looking for someone to rescue them. And the other person feels all important because, yes, that's a mean old boss, yada, yada, yada. It's a classic drama triangle, the Cartman triangle. And we don't want to fall into that trap. That's important to be aware of that.
Yep. Yep. And this is a classic thing. And this is the reason that we point out 500 feet is that at least twice a day, you got to go into this mind, right? If not, stay there for a little while. For those of you who drink coffee, you probably spend a long time in this place naturally, but it is a hammer and not everything is a nail. And to Fred's point, Cartman's drama triangle is exceptionally transactional in nature. It's those three states. You have the state of the victim, you have the state of the persecutor, and the state of the rescuer. The victim is the absolute pinnacle space. That's where everybody's trying to get. And they're going to start triangulating everyone else around them so that they can get to wherever that is. And so when you are in this transactional mind, you're running on autopilot with this kind of what is largely addictive, to be perfectly honest. That drama triangle is incredibly addictive because that's, I once heard, this is apocryphal probably in terms of statistics, but that 60 to 70% of all interactions in the United States are under the context of the drama triangle.
Well,
right?
I can see that. I mean, a lot of it happens from your family of origin. That's where it all happens. Mom, dad, and the kid. That's your triangle. And if you don't get something from mom, you go to dad. You don't get something from dad, you go to mom. And then there's you manipulate and so forth and so on. So you learn that at a very early age. And in business, it's insidious. I see that all the time. The Empowerment Dynamic is a wonderful book by David Emerald, who sadly passed away this year, where he talks about flipping the script a little bit on it. And I had a wonderful opportunity to sit in a course with him. And he showed you the language of the victim versus the language of someone who is rising above their circumstance. And that's really what it comes about. We're going to have a separate episode talking about victim and victors and vessel. Remember those three words because we're going to be using that alliteration a lot more. But this is something to be mindful of. And so, in business, it's just being aware that if you're in a meeting, you're in a dynamic where it gets a little tense and you see the person kind of zone out or freak out, clue you're in that area that you're out of shape or that individual's out of shape. Because don't forget, people are reacting to you, not just because of who you are, but because of the role you have. Because if you didn't have title of CEO or vice president, you were just a junior clerk, they would not react as strongly to some of the things that are being said. So there's a lot of dynamics at play here. So in this case, what would you say the mantra would be here?
I think that the mantra of the transactional mind to try and move out of that space is I can act without becoming my actions. I'll tell a quick story. I used to do those meditation retreats where I did 10 hours a day. And if you were a server, you could volunteer to be a server for 10 days. And you would probably meditate 4 or 5 hours, but you're mostly cooking and making it so that the meditators can have the best possible experience that they have. And they used to always say to us, these people, the meditators, are in noble silence, which means they're not looking at anybody. They're not talking to anybody. They are in complete isolation and they are enforcing it themselves. So it is extremely jarring to have somebody talk to you when you're in that state. Yeah. And one of the things they used to always say to us was they were like, if you need to go talk to a meditator as a server, your job is to say, am I reacting or am I acting? Am I reacting or am I acting? Did something happen and I want to immediately have this? That's that transactional mind. Yeah. It reacts. It doesn't know how to do anything else. Or can you wait even 30 seconds and choose to act and choose to actually take that step back? And I've taken that with me everywhere, well beyond the, trying to keep meditators in noble silence, right?
No, it's fantastic. Yes.
This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
Let's take a hot air balloon up a little bit higher. Now we're going to go to 5,000 feet. And this is this is the strategic mind, the contemplative mind. So now we're gaining much more altitude. We're going to be seeing more of the ground and the landscape underneath us. So let's walk through that one.
All right. So I call the strategic mind at 5,000 feet the contemplative mind. Have you ever had, Fred, I feel like you and I talk about this all the time. So this is this is like a question that I already know you have an answer to, which is that you put something in the hopper of your mind and a couple of days later, the answer just magically appears. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
In the shower.
Such a shower. What is it? There is something with the water hitting your head.
It's just kind of, it just mellows you out and all of a sudden things pop in. Yeah, but it's the quiet voice in your head pops in with the answer to your problem. I always joke about it and say, it's got to go into the database and go find the answer and come back. But that's an important thing of it. We mentioned earlier about meditation. And of course, in the state of meditation, one is going through the process of self-observation. Other people will take some time and have a practice of prayer, which is very, very fine. It's totally appropriate. But I love the expression I heard once that said, prayer is when you talk to God and meditation is when God talks to you. And
I love that.
if you're not busy talking and saying, "Oh, give me this, give me that, help me win the lotto," and you're just reflecting, and here's the paradox: you listen to the silence. Listen to the silence, and in that silence, your intuition is where things come in. Because intuition my God, what a great force it is for us humans. But intuition cannot work in a loud room very well. This is very different than flight or flight where there's danger and all that kind of stuff. This is different. It is a reflection of things that are going on when you get a sudden insight in terms of a course of action to take. And all of us go through that. I know that in business, you have a dilemma. You sit there and go, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" And that's where you're in that 500-foot level, trying to figure out all these options and so forth and so on. But and I'll tell you, the best way to do is get up, walk outside, get those large muscles moving, and just focus on being outdoors. And that actually helps you get into this contemplation state because you're focused on other things than just sitting. There's something about active walking. Steve Jobs used to do that with all his friends and direct reports. Let's go for a walk because in the walk, the serendipity of a walk is where the insights will come into your mind. So that's really, really important. And the insights, because we do call this the strategic mind, they're not tactical anymore because tactics are important. There's no doubt tactics are important. It's the actions one must take immediately now in the moment to move forward, hopefully. But strategic mind allows you to step back and realize that sometimes, like sailing, I used this metaphor before, you have to tack. You have to tack. That's what they call it, tactics. Tack. Changing direction, but you're not changing your bearing. And when you're in this reflective state, you're able to look and say, "This is what I want. And there's an obstacle in front of me. What do I do? Is this a constraint, something I can't do anything about? Or is it just an obstacle? I can get around it. I can climb over it, go around it, put a hole through it," whatever the case may be. And that's the benefit of doing something like this. So what's the mantra for this?
So the mantra I would say for the strategic mind is I rise above to see the whole picture. 5,000 feet is still pretty high, right? We're going to keep going higher. We're going to absolutely keep going higher. But
hot air balloon can go up. That's all right. We may have to switch to a supersonic jet, but right now we're still in our hot air balloon. So let's go up to the next level. We got a couple more levels to go.
We do.
15,000 feet, the integrative heart state, which I love this state because I discovered it recently. And this is where flow occurs. There's alignment to many, many things. And of course, we've talked about the ABCs already, so you know the critical nature of alignment to us. And then compassion, because when you're in your heart, it is a very, very different center than your mind, and a very critical one as part of our humanity. So go ahead, Kristina, tell us about this.
Yeah, so the integrative heart space, we've talked a lot about coherence and about how the space of the heart, even just concentrating on the space of the heart, is actually capable of being able to pull this in. But the reason we call it the integrative heart at 15,000 feet is because effectively, imagine that your system is an elevator that has balances on either side. It has a mental component and it has an emotional component. It has a feeling component, an energetic component, whatever you want to call it, right? Whatever kind of suits the way that you see things. Mm-hmm. And for overthinkers, the elevator can't go up at all because it's lopsided. It's banging into the wall, right? It's trying so hard to move up the elevator shaft, but it's misbalanced because that deliberative mind, that 500-foot view is just taking everything and making it so that everything is it's something that I have to hammer. I have to hammer. When you start to take into account whether or not you want to call it the heart or whether or not you want to call the natural flow of what you feel like doing, what feels like it's coming to you, kind of following as if you're not trying to go down the river by breaking all the rocks in the river to get rid of the rapids. You're in a boat, you're in a raft, and you are finding and navigating the flow that is naturally there in order to be able to move down the river effortlessly. And what happens when you get that integrative heart is that your elevator becomes balanced, right? And all of a sudden you have that emotional feeling part is functional. You have that contemplative mind is activated. And all of a sudden the elevator can lift to places y'all just don't even know. Like, hopefully, maybe you do. Maybe you've had those moments of lucidity and clarity of just like, oh my gosh, this is the state that I absolutely love to get people in and to help people get in. And I love to be in it myself because it feels as if the world is flowing in a completely different way. And, intuition is through the roof. And, you're experiencing life with an extremely different perspective because the whole system's balanced and able to move up to heights that you can't even, that a lot of us can't even fathom or only have for a moment.
Well, this is where, your mind and heart coherence comes to play. There are actually instruments you can use, you can buy to help you do that and see how you can get into that state of resonance between your heart and your mind. You still got to get your gut, but the heart and the mind are very, very critical. And it's interesting when we're talking about a business context, you start talking about the heart. A lot of people don't get that, but some great businesses out there are all heart in the sense that they lead with their heart. They understand that compassion is a critical part of it. If you have a stakeholder mentality where it's not just the business winning, but your employees, your vendors, your customers, your community, that comes from the heart. And that's an important piece of it. I know that during COVID, the companies that had the healthiest cultures came out fine. The ones that were toxic did not because people didn't feel cared for. They weren't psychologically and emotionally safe. And the practice, we already mentioned meditation. That is one of the ways, focusing on your breath, that you can get your head and your heart in coherence. And this is where you do begin to hold paradox, which we talked about in a previous episode in balance. Holding paradox, things that appear to be opposing forces, just realize, you know what? It's really two sides of the same coin. And leadership greatness comes in by understanding that and knowing where the balance is between the two, the push and the pull. They're not in opposition. They allow you to just shift your focus of where it needs to be. And that's really, really important. And it's the basis of where you start getting emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence cannot exist without an integrated heart. It cannot. Because emotional intelligence, one of the biggest qualities is empathy. Okay? Is that I understand what this person is going through. And because I've been in their shoes, or I can put myself in their shoes, I can relate to them in a very, very different way. As opposed to sympathy, which is kind of like, oh, gee, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's a shame. No. It's like, oh, man, I've been there. Let me just sit with you. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything. I'm just going to be here with you. And I just had a conversation this morning with a father who's got a 12-year-old who's got leukemia, who's going through chemo. And, we talked, and there were just a few minutes of silence, and that's okay. Sometimes it's just be present with someone. And that's part of that emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, the self-control, the social awareness, and the relationship management. And then as a leader, this is where you begin to build your culture. This is where it makes a big difference. This is where the limitations of one's inadequacies can be supplanted because you're beginning to focus on the people around you, not just on yourself. You go from
Yes.
being, selfish to selfless. And that's an important aspect of this. So what is the mantra for that, Kristina?
So I would say the mantra for this is I am the bridge between mind and soul.
Oh,
There's
beautiful.
one thing, yeah, it's a good one. There was one thing I want to say too about this because it just came to me when you were speaking, Fred. That was such a wonderful way of saying it. For anybody who's ever read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, he talks a lot about solipsism, right? And solipsism is the concept in that we can never be aware of another person's state. Like the only thing we can be responsible for is our own state. Buddhism is a solipsistic religion because it basically says the sensations that are going on in my mind are the only things I can actually sense, and therefore I can't be held to account for what Fred's feeling, right? And so in a lot of ways, what we recognize is that the mind is naturally solipsistic. It's very insular and it's very
Right.
stuck inside. And if you were to think about every other person who's walking on this planet, and you were to try and think about how incredibly intricate their mind is, we would all get completely overwhelmed by that, right?
Sure.
But when you move from trying to understand the complexity of another person using the mind as the comparison, and you instead move into the heart, you start to recognize that it's actually extremely simple to understand another person if you approach them from the heart, if you approach them from a feeling perspective. It's incredibly easy to understand a state of suffering that somebody else is in, to understand a state of grief or loss that somebody else is experiencing, right? If you try and contemplate or think about what might be the best thing, or that's a perfect example. Somebody in your company or somebody that you know has lost somebody that they love. That's a
Sure.
perfect example. That is, if you were to say, well, okay, I can go back on my principles, which is that my family used to always send a casserole and flowers.
Yeah.
Right. And okay, that's great. Great job. You solved a problem. You went to an old way of doing it and you solved the problem, right? You could go and take a walk and you could recognize that this person used to always, go fishing. Right. And they're now going to not go fishing because they used to go fishing with this person. Right. And you're kind of like, that's the contemplative mind giving you an answer that feels a bit better. Right. Like a bit more personal. It's like you're really trying to like go back into the recesses of your mind and your memory and kind of come up with something that feels personalized. But if you're in a state of the heart, you can go up to anybody in any state of grief because all of us have experienced grief. And you sit there and you hold space and you relate in whatever way that's working. And your mind may be like, oh, well, that's callous, or you shouldn't do that, or shouldn't do that. That's that 500 foot trying to come back in. But
Sure.
ultimately, you relate to somebody in the heart, and you're going to do whatever you can do, and you're going to connect with them on a very deep level.
Yeah. Well, and this, just to add to that before I move on to the final level, is that if you have that empathy and the understanding of other people's circumstance and condition, it makes you much more attuned with your customers. You begin to understand that they have specific needs. Why are they buying from you if you're a manufacturer? Why are they buying services from you if you're a service provider? Why are they buying food and beverage from you if you're a restaurateur? It's because they need something, they want something, and your understanding of that and actually elevating their sense of self-worth. So a good friend of mine used to say to me, the great restaurants of the world hand you your dignity back to when you walk in, because
Oh, that's so nice. I
yeah,
love that.
yeah, well, that's being of service to somebody. You are serving them. And it's really the best gift that we can give to each other, is to be of service to one another. Um, but we're going to get our hot air balloons up really high. Put your oxygen masks on. Now we're talking about 35,000 foot level. This is the field of love. And I guess my question on that, because we just finished talking about the integrative heart, so it's about emotion. But now we're talking about specifically the field of love, where you have a state of surrender, non-duality. This is really where the paradox is gone. You see this entirety holistically. You have a vision of things much broader than before. So this could be a little nuanced. So walk us through that, Kristina, so that people can grasp the difference between just talking about the heart and not talking about a field of love.
Yes. Okay. So This is a really interesting one. It's just like when you're in a plane, right? Or, and you can't see the people who are on the ground. You're so high up, 35,000 feet cruising altitude for a plane.
Yeah.
This field of love, I'll tell a story to try and to show this. For years, I did not believe that evil existed. I know that sounds crazy to say. I still don't necessarily believe that it exists in the traditional way that we would all say that it does, but I was stuck in a 35,000 foot view of the world because that suited me for the time period in which I was meditating a lot and I was doing things
Sure.
like that. It's like when you start to get up to that level, the pain and suffering that's happening on the ground in the daily life of somebody's mind or in somebody's life it disappears. And that is both a gift and it can be a trap, right? And so in its most beautiful form, it is a gift. And for those of you who have ever had those kind of transcendent experiences of waking up in the middle of the night and, and you're just like, oh my God, I'm connected to everything and everything is just love. And I just feel everything. And it's like, I hope that people listening to this have had that experience. If not, I hope that you will, because it is amazing. It's incredible to feel this state of euphoria and connection to every other thing that is around in this field of just, you feel like you're part of the fabric, right? Like you're not anything other than the fabric. You are just another thread crossing over that's created a person, and it's just amazing, right? And it's important to get to that view, to understand and be able to see things. But you got to come down because you're in a body. You got to land. And if you get stuck up there, you can forget about the things that are necessary in order to live, right? You can forget about the fact that there is suffering. You can forget about the fact that you need to sleep and you need to eat.
Right.
All of those different things. Fred, tell me about your experience of this state.
Well, I mean, first off, one of the things you said very recently is that you're not just staying in one state. You're moving up and down. We're trying to help you understand the different levels that one can attain and the value of being at that level for whatever period of time you choose to be there. But yes, you're not on the mountaintops, with your legs crossed, meditating and I love the world. That's not realistic. We live in this world. But I'll share with you that I had an experience of this when I went to India last year. And I went to 26 temples and an ashram. And at every temple, we had ceremonies and pujas, which are elaborate ceremonies and meditation. And I was like the frog being boiled in the waters. The more I went to these different places, the quicker I got into a meditative state, accessing higher levels, the deeper it became, or the higher, whichever you want to talk about in terms of frequency. Um, and it changed. When I came back to the United States, I had grown in a very different way, and it was mostly my heart. My heart felt out here. Everyone talks about an aura. You might say, "Oh, it's about a foot away," but mine was out here. It was just enormous, especially just fresh back off that trip. And what was interesting to me is I was working with a very difficult client when I left. Very, very difficult. Probably the most toxic culture I've ever worked with. And I was struggling with it before I left because it was like they enjoyed it. It's like, sitting in a pile of poop and saying, "This is great. Isn't this wonderful? Here, come on in." And there's no way. And I was judging it, right? Because I was like, "Oh my God, this is just not good." And it was funny because, we had a conference and we talked to their team and you saw people get a glimmer of hope that it could be different. It could change. And when I got back, they just weren't having it. But what the difference for me was that when I got back, the judgment was gone. I looked at this culture, I looked at some of the key individuals, and I said, you know what? They're just fractured souls. They are doing the best they can with the circumstances they grew up in. I'm not here to judge it. I'm not here to condone it. I did know I didn't want to be part of it, and I made sure that I got out of it. I just said I don't want to be around these low frequency people. There's nothing's going to begin. I'll get sucked down into the muck with them. But I no longer had the judgment. I felt compassion, and I was surprised. I didn't expect that, and that's an example that I can give you of how this can work to do that.
Yeah.
So what would the mantra be for this state?
The mantra for the state is all of it is love becoming form. And that's all of it is love. The really key part of that is becoming
Yeah,
form,
yeah.
right? There's,
Manifestation of the
yeah, manifestation of how one of the things that, there are a number of hindrances in Buddhism. When you go deeply into it, hindrances meaning they are things that prevent you from progressing down the path towards enlightenment. And I'm talking about Buddhism a lot in this, but this is a concept that repeats in many, many different religions, spiritual practices, and is not necessarily religious. Buddhism is not even really a religion. It's a practice more so than anything. But the hindrance is the desire for the formless. That was what I was guilty of for many years. I felt like the human body was a very difficult thing to be in, and I struggled with it. And so I would spend so much time in meditation and in states of escapism sometimes, whether it was through stories or meditation or dreams or things along those lines. Some people might call that depression, but to me, it wasn't depression. I was very active during that time, but I just had this kind of desire for the formless. And that was, to me, the biggest indication that I was stuck at 35,000 feet. I couldn't land. I couldn't get back down and land into my body and just be like, yeah, this is a little painful. This is,
Yeah.
I got a sore here and I got this hurts.
Well, and in business, you don't have the luxury of that. I mean, you're going to have moments of being able to hit to those peaks and transcend your circumstance, which is what we're talking about. It's really transcending your circumstance, and you've got to be practical. We're not all going to go off and be monks. I don't want to become a monk. I enjoy life. I enjoy the challenges. I mean, I learned a long time ago that life will give you challenges to overcome, and the person you become in overcoming those challenges is part of the journey. That's really the outcome.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
that's what I've seen. And so now, when I have a moment of respite where it's like, hey, things are going pretty good, I go, okay, I'm going to enjoy this because I know something's coming. I have no idea what it is, but I don't dread it anymore. I feel prepared. I actually embrace it because the sooner I learn that lesson, I don't have to go back and repeat it over and over again. I can learn it and move on from that standpoint. But let's
That's
recap for people, Kristina. Go through the
Can I
daily.
can I just add one more thing before we recap? Is that all right?
Of course. You're like Steve Jobs. Just one more thing. Go ahead.
Just one more thing. I swear, just one more thing. Okay. I wanted to say, I really wanted to reflect on what you just said, like to really point out how important that is that everything in our life is through cycles. Everything is taking off of the plane, being at that high level and kind of coming down. And when you're in that cruising altitude in which it feels like things aren't difficult, there's not a lot of turbulence, there's not a lot of air resistance, there's not, you have a
Yeah.
tailwind maybe even, and everything just seems to be going great. Like, that's a time to like really be grateful for. But it's also really good to recognize that it's good to be grateful for the other states too, because that's how you then kind of shift your mind to say, I'm okay with either of them and I'm going to be equanimous no matter what happens. That's the whole reason why a lot of people meditate, is because they're trying to develop this like good, bad, craving, aversion, whatever you want to say. I'm going to be okay. For me, I wanted to be in the formless, and I wanted to still feel love everywhere without getting into that high state and just staying in that state. So I decided that love was every single sensation that I felt. That was how I got out of it. That's how I healed from this state of almost like perpetual. It's not nihilism, but it's more of it's the craving for the formless. That's how I healed from it. Was I just said every single sensation that I have. So the more sensations I have, the more love I'm feeling. Right. And yeah, so it's a beautiful thing. So
well, I'll comment on one thing because I was in India. The linga, which is the term they use, is the formless form. That is in many of the temples, and it looks like a bullet of sorts. Not really a bullet.
Well,
but
it's a phallus, right? It's
phallus.
Shiva's phallus.
Yeah. So there's that. That was the point. It just reminded me of that. But anyway, let's get back down to how do you manage this on a daily basis? What would be the ritual in this case that one could use to access all these levels for the period of time, incorporate them into one's body so the coherence is there, and that equanimity is present, the peace, the perspective, the lack of judgment, and essentially living the universe is neutral.
Yep. Yep. I think what we see is beginning end of the day, you're at zero.
Right.
Recognize that in your sleep, you're probably getting pretty high up in altitude as well. But for the time of waking and sleeping, when you're going in and out of the transition of the
Yeah.
subconscious, you're going to be at zero. And then as you wake up, I feel like it's a really good thing. It doesn't really matter in terms of the cycle throughout the day. Everyone's going to find, and I would encourage you to find the cycle of what altitudes work the best for you. I think one of the most important things to recognize is that you don't get stuck in one for too long.
Yeah. It's
You
like a bell curve. You go up and then you come back down. Yeah.
right? And so meditating in the morning gets you into that observer state if you're doing mindfulness meditation. If you're doing coherence meditation, you may be getting into that integrative heart state, right? So depending on the type of meditation you're doing, which, we could cover extensively, but those are two examples, two common examples. Transcendental meditation for anybody who does TM is an integrative heart. It's a flow state. You're cultivating a flow state. You're repeating a mantra, your mantra in your head, and you're creating a flow state and an ecstatic state, which can sometimes go up into that all is love state. And then, or you're doing a mindfulness meditation, or you're the observer, you're in the contemplative mind. And those are two states that are really, really good to cultivate. Recognize that the 35,000 foot view that most people get inside their body is usually something that you have to dedicate deep work to for a couple of days or a week or something like that. Going to a retreat and really like giving yourself the time to get to that state. They can spontaneously happen, but it is harder to get to that state. And don't spend all day at 500, y'all. Just don't.
No, that makes sense. No, this is a beautiful conversation. I do want to remind everybody to please take a moment to subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast or watching this on YouTube, you can make comments on YouTube. We do read them to see what people have to say. Otherwise, send us an email at growth@theexecutiveandthemystic.com for ideas. We're going to also be having guests on our show to talk about their moments that they've gone to the inflection points, their version of the ABC. And we've got a nice long list of people that we love and respect and admire that are going to be willing to be courageous and join us. So it's been a delight to spend this time with you. Thank you for staying to the bitter end. And Kristina, as always, thank you.
Thank you, friend.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.